Chapter 1: Exile. The wind howled across the Scandinavian mountains like a hungry beast, clawing at the pines and rattling the shutters of Astrid's cabin. She sat by the hearth, her needle moving slowly through a strip of deer hide, though her eyes weren't on her work. They stared into the flames, orange tongues dancing, whispering memories she could not quiet. The clan. Their faces had been the first she saw when she came screaming into this world. Rough, rugged men with beards thick as bear fur, women whose hands were scarred but strong from grinding, weaving, and wielding. They were family, as inseparable as the roots of the ancient spruce that clung to the mountainside. And yet, they had turned on her as if she were nothing more than driftwood. All because she said no. She still remembered the night of her refusal. The great hall had smelled of smoke and roasted venison, the long tables laden with mead horns and bowls of broth. The clan leader, Erik, had stood tall at the end of the hall, his chest broad, his braided beard glinting with bronze beads. He was a man feared and admired, and she had been bound to him since childhood. But when the moment came, when he had placed his hand on her shoulder before all their kin, Astrid had lifted her chin and spoken the word that sealed her exile. No. The silence after had been sharper than any blade. And the punishment swift. Now she lived in the shadow of those mountains, alone, with only the crackle of the fire and the call of ravens for company. Her cabin was small, the logs rough-hewn, but it kept the snow off her head and the wolves at bay. It was survival, nothing more. That night, though, the loneliness pressed heavier than the cold. She reached for her cloak, pulling it tighter about her shoulders, when a sound split the night. A knock. Astrid froze. Her heart thudded against her ribs. No one ever came here. Not unless they wanted to mock her, or worse. She grabbed the small knife from the table and edged toward the door. Another knock, louder, impatient, carrying the weight of someone strong. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice steady though her knees trembled. Then a deep, rough voice, strained with pain. "Help me, please." Against her better judgment, she unbarred the door. There he stood, tall as a pine, shoulders broad enough to block the wind, with hair dark as raven's wings spilling down his back. His face was striking, carved as if by the gods themselves, but his eyes, icy blue, burning with something feral, caught her breath in her throat. He leaned heavily against the frame, one hand clutching his side. "I was hunting," he rasped, "and a boar gored me." Astrid's gaze flicked to his tunic, torn and stained with blood. The wound looked deep. Too deep to survive long in this weather. She should shut the door. Should send him back into the night and guard her solitude like a fortress. But her hands moved of their own accord, guiding him inside. "Sit," she ordered, pointing to the stool by the fire. "Let me see." He obeyed, though his eyes never left her. They followed her every movement, sharp and unblinking, like a predator watching prey. And yet, when she pressed a damp cloth to his wound, he hissed softly, not from pain, but as though the touch itself unsettled him. "What's your name?" she asked, more to distract herself than him. He hesitated. "Leaf." Something about the way he said it, hesitant, almost reluctant, made her think it was not the whole truth. But she said nothing. Instead, she worked in silence, cleaning and binding the wound as best she could. Leaf's breath slowed, but his gaze lingered, heavy as the snow clouds above. "You live alone," he said at last, his voice low. "Why?" The question cut deeper than his wound. She lifted her chin. "Because my clan does not want me." His lips curved, almost a smile, though there was nothing kind in it. "Fools." Astrid turned back to the fire, ignoring the heat that flushed her cheeks. She didn't see how his nostrils flared slightly, as though catching a scent carried in the warmth of her cabin. How his hands gripped the stool too tightly, knuckles whitening. The beast inside him stirred. When morning came, Astrid expected him gone. Men did not linger in the home of an outcast. They took what they needed and returned to the world that had rejected her. But Leaf stayed. He stood outside the cabin, shirt discarded, splitting logs with her dull axe as though it weighed no more than a stick. Astrid tried not to stare at the play of muscles across his back, the scar that ran down his shoulder blade. When she demanded to know why he hadn't left, he only shrugged. "Your firewood stack was pitiful," he said. "You'd not last the next storm." And so he remained. Each day, he found another excuse. The roof leaked, and he climbed atop to patch it with pine tar. Her snares were crude, and he showed her knots that caught twice as much. He helped carry water from the frozen stream, hefted stones for the hearth, and mended tools with a quiet competence that unsettled her more than his presence itself. Astrid argued at first, pride bristling, but slowly she began to accept the help. And in the quiet moments, while she salted fish, while he carved handles for her knives, while they ate their meager meals before the fire, the loneliness she had worn like armor began to crack. One evening, she caught herself laughing at something he said, a deep, unpolished jest about wolves being better company than clansmen. The sound startled her. It had been months since laughter had touched her lips. Could she dare hope for something more? But Leif, he was not at peace. When Astrid turned her back, his jaw would tighten, his gaze darkening with some unspoken weight. At night, when he thought she slept, he prowled the edges of the cabin, restless, his chest rising and falling as though he were listening to something only he could hear. The longer he stayed, the more his conscience gnawed at him. He was no hunter who stumbled on a cabin by chance. He had smelt her, tracked her, lingered in the woods watching until his resolve broke. Every day he remained, every chore he completed by her side, every accidental brush of hands at the water bucket bound him tighter to her, and to the lie. She looked at him with cautious hope. He looked back with hunger and guilt. But then came the sound. At first, Astrid thought it was only the storm rising. A long, low note that rolled through the trees. But when it came again, higher, sharper, her skin prickled. A howl. Astrid's knife was in her hand before she knew it, her body coiled tight. She turned to Leif, but his expression hadn't changed. He sat utterly still, eyes fixed on the flames, as though he were listening to something only he could hear. "You've wolves in these mountains," she said carefully. Leif's gaze flicked to hers. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw his pupils stretch, elongate, before the firelight returned them to normal. "Yes," he said at last, his voice like gravel. "Many wolves." The wind rattled the shutters, and outside, another howl rose, closer this time. Astrid swallowed, her hand tightening on the knife. "And Leif," he smiled. A heavy thump shook the wall as something brushed against the cabin. Astrid's breath caught. Wolves did not come so close to fire and man. Unless driven. Her hand tightened on the knife. They shouldn't be this near. Leif stood slowly, his height filling the small cabin, and for the first time since entering, he looked dangerous. "They are not near," he said, his smile widening. "They are here." A chorus of howls erupted outside, dozens of voices rising, weaving together into a sound that made her bones ache with dread. Shadows passed by the window, sleek and fast. The snow outside churned under heavy paws. Astrid's blood turned cold. The cabin was no fortress against a pack. She whirled on Leif. "What have you brought here?" Before he could answer, another sound cut through the storm. Faint but growing, a different rhythm. The shouts of men. The crackle of fire carried on the wind. Torches. Astrid's stomach dropped. Her clan. She stumbled back, her knife still raised, torn between the dangers outside. On one side, glowing eyes prowled in the darkness. On the other, flames of men who had cast her out. Leif stepped toward her, his presence filling the room, his eyes now unmistakably inhuman, silver gleaming where blue had been. His voice was low, steady, almost intimate as the cabin shook with approaching chaos. "Choose, Astrid. The wolves, or them." Her heart thundered. Wolves pressed against the door. The clan drew closer, their voices angry, hungry for blood. Two worlds collided at her doorstep. And whichever she chose, there would be no turning back. Chapter 2, The Clan's Claim. Erik's torch cut through the storm, casting jagged shadows across the snow. His men fanned out behind him, shields slung on their backs, axes gleaming faintly in the firelight. Their boots crunched over the frozen ground as they moved swiftly up the slope toward the lonely cabin. It had been Erik's command that cast Astrid into exile, yet his heart had not known peace since. Each time the longhouse fires dimmed and he was left with his thoughts, her face returned to him. Proud, defiant, untamed as the mountains themselves. He told himself he had acted for the good of the clan, that her refusal was rebellion, a seed of weakness he could not allow. But in truth, her banishment gnawed at him. The wolves had only sharpened his guilt. Hunters had returned speaking of their howls circling her home, of tracks pressed too close to the cabin walls. A leader could not ignore such signs. And a man who loved her, even in anger, could not leave her to die. So Erik had summoned his strongest men, not only to save her, but to prove to Astrid that he, not her solitude, was her protector, that she belonged at his side, as wife and shield maiden of the clan. The first howl split the air as they reached the cabin. More followed, rising in a terrible chorus, and then the wolves burst from the tree line. Dozens of them, eyes burning like embers, their bodies sleek and black against the snow. Shields! Erik roared, raising his own. The fight was chaos. Wolves darted in with snapping jaws, retreating just as quickly, testing the men's lines. Spears struck, axes swung, and blood splattered hot across the snow. Astrid's screams pierced through the din as one beast leapt for her, only to fall beneath Erik's blade, its body twisting before it lay still. The men fought with desperation, back to back, driving the creatures off inch by inch. Erik's fury was unmatched, his every strike fueled not only by duty but by his desire to prove himself to Astrid, who he glimpsed huddled against the cabin door. At last, the wolves withdrew, their howls echoing as they retreated into the forest. The snow was littered with carcasses, and the men groaned with wounds, but the clan had held. Unseen in the frenzy, a darker shadow moved at the edges of battle. Leaf, his body torn by claws, lay hidden where he had been flung into the drifts. His breath came ragged, silver eyes dimming, as the pack melted back into the night without him. Erik did not see. Astrid did not know. When the fight ended, Erik strode to her, his chest heaving, his axe dripping. His hand reached for her arm. "You are safe now. Come home." But to Astrid, his grip felt like a shackle. She fought against it, her voice hoarse. "No, I will not." Her protest was drowned by his men, who lifted her from the snow and dragged her down the mountain. Behind her, the cabin vanished into the storm. And with it, the memory of Leaf. The days passed, but for Astrid, each one felt like a tightening rope around her throat. The village began to treat her not as an outcast but as a curiosity. When she fetched water, women nodded to her. When she mended nets, men muttered thanks. At the hearth fires, children gathered around her knees, asking for stories, and the elders praised her herbs for easing their coughs. But with each kindness came the unspoken weight. She is Erik's now. She must be. At feasts, men raised their cups to toast her return. Women smiled knowingly, whispering of how she would soon warm Erik's bed and bear his sons. The younger girls looked on with envy, as if Astrid had won some prize instead of a cage. And always, Erik watched her. By day, he courted her as a man should, or so he thought. He praised her aloud so all could hear. He placed gifts in her hands, a cloak trimmed with fox fur, a brooch of carved bone, a silver cup filled with sweet mead. Each gift was presented with a flourish, and each time she refused, the air around them grew colder. "You dishonor me when you refuse," he murmured once, pressing the brooch into her palm before all the hall. "Do you wish to shame me again?" She wore it that night, not for him but to silence the stares of the others. And still it felt like a shackle around her throat. By night, he went to Inga. Inga was merciless in her triumph. She paraded herself before Astrid each morning, her lips swollen with kisses, her hair perfumed, her laugh sharp as a spear point. She dropped sly remarks where all could hear. "Erik is a generous man," she said one evening as Astrid passed. "He gives freely of himself." Laughter followed. Astrid kept walking, her jaw set, her face calm. She would not give them the satisfaction. But inside, the tension twisted tighter. Her parents were relentless. "You cannot spurn him forever," her mother whispered, her eyes darting to ensure none overheard. "Every woman would kill for what you've been offered." Her father was harsher. "You dishonor us with your stubbornness. Do you not see? He has saved you, sheltered you, restored you. He will raise us all with you. Would you throw away your blood's future for foolish pride?" Astrid's throat burned with the truth she could not speak. It was not pride but her heart that rebelled. For even if Erik wrapped her in gold and silks, She would not love him. Yet the more she resisted, the more the clan turned its eyes on her. Women gossiped, men smirked, children whispered. Each look carried the same question: when will she yield? The village welcomed her cautiously, like a wolf circling a stranger's kill. At first, the people kept their distance, speaking in murmurs when she passed. They remembered her defiance, the shame she had brought upon Erik in the great hall. But Astrid did not cower. She poured herself into the life of the village, and slowly, respect came, though it came at the cost of Erik's tighter grip. One evening, the longhouse swelled with noise and firelight. Erik sat at the head of the table, Inga curled at his side like a cat, her hand bold on his arm. The people feasted, laughing, drinking, chanting his name. And then Erik rose. "My people," he called, lifting his cup, "tonight we drink not only to victory over the wolves, but to the return of Astrid, who belongs once more among us." The hall erupted with cheers, and Astrid's blood ran cold. His words rang like a claim, a binding she had not agreed to. All eyes turned to her, clapping, urging her to rise, to smile, to play her part. She stood, her face pale but proud, and raised her cup, silencing their voices. "I thank you for your welcome," she said, her voice carrying clear across the hall. "But I belong only to myself." A hush fell. Some gasped. Erik's smile froze. Later, when the fire had burned low and the hall emptied of laughter, Erik cornered her in the shadows. His hand pressed against the wall beside her head, his voice low and dangerous. "You shame me again. Before my people. Before my men." Astrid met his gaze, her own steady. "Better to shame you than betray myself." For a long moment, the firelight flickered between them. Then Erik smiled, slow and sharp. "You cannot fight me forever, Astrid. If you will not come willingly, I will make you see reason. In time." His shadow stretched long as he walked away, leaving her heart pounding, her mind ablaze. And for the first time, Astrid understood that it was not only her freedom at stake. Erik's pride, his rule, perhaps even the clan's peace, all of it now rested on her choice. And she had not yet made it. Chapter 3: The Wolf Pack. Leif woke with the cold biting through him, the forest floor pressing unforgiving against his back. Pain lanced through his ribs and shoulder, but worse than the ache was the gnawing uncertainty. Astrid, where was she? Had Erik taken her for good? A growl sounded from the shadows. His instincts surged, muscles coiling even through the pain. Figures emerged, the first of his wolf pack, their forms shifting fluidly between man and beast. They descended upon him with swift precision, dragging him out of the open, murmuring low assurances, and pressing herbs and salves into his wounds. By the time he was set near the fire at their hidden enclave, his ribs throbbing and his shoulder screaming, the flames cast long, flickering shadows over the rough-hewn cave walls. Lexi approached, her gait fluid, every movement calculated to draw his attention. Her amber eyes glinted in the firelight. "You should rest," she murmured, brushing against him. "But you are far too stubborn." Leif allowed a faint smirk, even as the ache in his side reminded him of the brutal fall. "And you are far too bold," he replied, his voice low, warning yet amused. Lexi's grin widened. She pressed closer, pressing her body to his in a teasing advance, whispering, "You cannot deny what you feel for me." Leif's jaw tightened. He allowed himself a fleeting indulgence, a touch, a taste, but he made no claim. His heart was elsewhere, with Astrid, and every pulse reminded him of her. The night, however, would not be calm. From the edges of the enclave, a shrill howl erupted, followed by the sound of crashing branches. Young wolves leapt to their feet, claws digging into rock and soil. Leif rose, shoulder screaming, but adrenaline surging, as more figures emerged through the moonlit forest. Rogue wolves, challengers from another pack, drawn by scent and hunger. "Get them!" he barked, his command igniting the pack into motion. Fur flashed and claws slashed. Leif moved like a shadow, dodging, striking, his strength terrifying even to the intruders. Lexi leapt beside him, teeth bared, swiping at a snarling male trying to flank him. Other pack members surged, their collective growls shaking the air, echoing against the mountainside. Sparks of rock and fire from the central blaze illuminated the violent ballet. In the chaos, Leif's mind drifted only briefly to Astrid. Her safety was the goal that drove him, the fire in his chest that gave him speed and power. Each attacker felled, each rogue wolf sent fleeing into the night, brought the pack closer, and yet his thoughts returned relentlessly to the woman he could not be with. When the last challenger had been driven away, the wolves gathered around the fire, panting, muscles rippling, jaws snapping. Lexi pressed close again, her triumph mingled with desire. "See, I fight for you," she whispered, pressing her lips near his ear. Leif pulled back slightly, chest heaving, amber eyes blazing. "I do not fight for you." "Not yet," he said, his tone soft yet firm, warning and indulgent all at once. Around the fire, the pack exhaled relief and pride. She-wolves swooned, young males flexed, showing strength and dominance. Lexi, however, would not be denied. Her eyes followed Leif constantly, studying his movements, gauging his moods, searching for a weakness to exploit. Meanwhile, Leif sent his trusted soldiers toward the Viking village. They would watch Astrid, ensuring that Erik's men did not harm her, or worse, that she did not face unneeded danger. Reports would come in, slow and steady, but the knowledge brought him little comfort. Later, as he sat again by the fire, tending to his wounds, Lexi's hand brushed against his arm, her whisper teasing. "One day, you will see that I am the only one worthy of you." Leif's gaze turned to the flames, mind racing. Astrid. That was all that mattered. Lexi could scheme, flaunt, seduce, and plot, but she was no threat to the heart he had already given, even from afar. And yet the night reminded him that danger waited everywhere. Both for him and for the woman who had claimed his thoughts, a storm brewing that could consume both wolves and men alike. Chapter 4, Spring Decree. The village square buzzed with activity as the first hint of spring warmed the air. Children chased one another through puddles left by the melting snow, and the smell of wood smoke curled from half-repaired huts. Astrid moved among the villagers, carrying buckets of water and stacking firewood, her hands steady, her mind uneasy. Yet today, there was a different energy in the air, one that made her chest tighten. Erik strode into the square, armor clinking with authority. His gaze swept over the crowd, landing finally on Astrid. There was no hint of humor in his eyes, only iron and purpose. A hush fell over the village as he raised a hand. "People of the clan," he began, voice booming, "hear me well." All eyes turned toward him, including Astrid's. She felt the familiar sinking weight in her stomach, the dread that had shadowed her since her return. "I have decided," Erik continued, his tone leaving no room for question, "that Astrid shall be my wife. Our wedding will take place this spring, at the first full moon after planting season. Let none speak against it." Gasps rippled through the villagers. Astrid froze, speechless, the wooden bucket in her hands feeling suddenly too heavy to lift. Her parents' faces lit up with delight, smiles wide, hands clasped together in glee. "Oh, Astrid, what a match," her mother gushed. "Your name will be spoken with honor across the fjords." Her father nodded vigorously, pride and relief etched in every line of his face. "Finally, our daughter will secure her place and our family's future." Astrid could barely breathe. Everything in her rebelled, her heart, her will, her memories of life alone in the mountains. Yet the joy radiating from her parents, the pride of the clan, made her feel like a traitor for not sharing it. One pair of eyes, however, betrayed none of the celebration. Inga, standing slightly apart from the crowd, clenched her fists. Her jaw was tight, her lips pressed into a thin line. She had expected Erik to make moves, but this declaration stirred a fierce fire within her. If she could not have him freely, she would force him. She would become the mother of his children, and Erik would have no choice but to claim her as his queen. The thought made her pulse quicken, her plans forming like the sharpening of a blade. Astrid, meanwhile, felt a cold hollow settle in her chest. She had survived the mountains, found a strange sense of peace, and even glimpsed a different kind of hope with Leif. And now, Erik had struck with the finality of a hammer, claiming what he wanted as though she were no more than a prize. Her mind wandered to Leif, to the warmth and strength she had felt with him, and a pang of longing twisted through her. She did not even know if he had survived the chaos of the wolf attack. And now, as Erik's smile glinted in the sunlight, she felt more trapped than ever, caught between duty, family, and the man who held her heart. Erik approached her, his stride confident, his hand brushing hers as he passed. "Astrid," he said, a teasing curl to his lips, "I expect your obedience and your devotion." Astrid swallowed, forcing a nod. Her voice had failed her. She could only glare, internally vowing she would not give her heart so easily. Behind the quiet display of submission, a storm brewed. Inga's eyes followed her every move, plotting, calculating, ready to strike when the chance arose. And somewhere in the distant mountains, far from the eyes of men, Leaf soldiers kept watch, every instinct alert to the life of the woman who unknowingly had him chained to her fate. The spring sun shone brightly, but for Astrid, the warmth felt like a trap, and the promise of marriage a tightening noose. Chapter 5: Schemes and Shadows. The wind tore through the mountain pass as Leaf stood atop the ridge, eyes fixed on the Viking village in the distance. The smoke from chimneys drifted lazily into the evening sky, but the peace of the scene was a lie. News of Astrid's upcoming marriage had reached him through his scouts, and his chest tightened with a mix of anger and despair. "I cannot let this happen," he muttered, voice low, almost lost to the wind. "I must reach her. She must know the truth, must know how I feel." Around him, his pack shifted restlessly, sensing his urgency. Lexi, her amber eyes glinting, slithered closer. "You think you can go to her?" she hissed. "Do you truly believe she will see you, untouched by Erik's grip?" Leaf's jaw tightened, muscles coiling. "She will see me, Lexi. And she will know the truth. You will not harm her." Her grin was venomous. "We shall see," she whispered, retreating into the shadows, already plotting her next move. Meanwhile, in the longhouse, Erik's control over the village remained absolute. He walked among the villagers with an air of ownership, his presence a constant reminder of the marriage he had decreed. Yet even he was not immune to distraction. Inga had ensnared him completely, her calculated seductions drawing him ever closer. Whispers of her pregnancy were already making the rounds, although only a few knew the truth. The longhouse was alive that night with the clatter of tankards and the hum of conversation. Inga made her entrance like a shadow slipping between beams of firelight, eyes scanning until they found Astrid. "I bring news," she declared, voice sharp, carrying easily above the din good news, for those who dare to claim it. Her gaze settled on Astrid with predatory precision. "I will be the one to claim the true right to be queen, or none shall have the title at all." Erik slammed his hand on the table, silencing the room. "You are nothing here," he barked. "No title, no claim. You will bear no child of mine in this hall, so sit down and eat, or leave this place before I throw you out." Inga's grin flickered but did not die. She bowed mockingly, her mind already weaving new schemes as she sat down at the long table beside Erik. "Perhaps," she murmured, voice low enough for Astrid to hear, "you will regret underestimating me." Astrid felt her blood run cold. The woman's menace was tangible, a shadow stretching across her heart, reaching for the space reserved only for Leaf. She clenched her hands, feeling the weight of Erik's gaze, her parents' eager smiles, and the impossible choice that had been thrust upon her. "Do not let them see fear in you," her mother whispered later that evening, glancing toward Inga, who lingered outside the longhouse, watching. "You must accept your duty. Erik is your future." But Astrid could not. The thought of Leaf, alone, wounded, watching from afar, gnawed at her. And now, Inga threatened to poison that connection, to make Astrid fear even her own heart. Outside, in the forest, Leaf paced restlessly, mapping the safest path through the trees. Every step toward the village was a gamble, every shadow a potential trap. Yet he could not wait. The thought of Astrid marrying Erik, bearing his child, spurred him forward. He would reach her. He would speak. And if anyone, human or wolf, dared interfere, they would answer to him. Lexi, crouched among the trees, watched him leave, eyes narrowed. She had plans of her own. If she could not be queen by choice, she would ensure that Astrid's place was taken by illness or fear. Her lips curled around the thought of poison, her mind racing through every opportunity to strike. Within the village, the night ended with whispers, glances, and tension thick enough to choke. Inga's hand rested possessively on Erik's arm, her eyes gleaming with triumph at her secret, while Lexi plotted her vengeance. And somewhere beyond the ridge, Leif's eyes burned with a single, unyielding focus: Astrid. The threads were tightening, the pieces moving into place. Spring's promise of life and growth masked the danger waiting to explode, danger that would change everything for Vikings and wolves alike. Chapter 6: Secrets at the Forest Edge. The late afternoon sun hung low over the village, casting long shadows across the frost-crusted ground. Astrid wrapped her cloak tightly and slipped quietly out of the longhouse, claiming she simply wished for a breath of fresh air. Her parents were distracted by the ongoing preparations for the wedding, leaving her free. She wandered past the familiar cottages, past the long rows of stacked firewood, and toward the edge of the forest. The scent of pine and damp earth filled her lungs, and for a fleeting moment, she felt the loneliness she had known in the mountains lift. Then she heard a voice, low and familiar, cutting through the rustle of leaves. Astrid. She turned, heart leaping, and there he was, Leif, standing as if he had emerged from the shadows themselves. Relief and joy surged through her as she ran to him, throwing herself into his arms. "You came," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Of course," he replied, holding her close, the warmth of his body anchoring her to the moment. "I could not let them take you, not without saying what I must." They pulled back slightly, faces inches apart. His eyes searched hers, solemn and burning. "Astrid, I love you. I have loved you since the day you refused him. Nothing, no clan, no duty, will change that." Astrid's hands traced the line of his jaw. "Leif, I love you too. I cannot marry Erik. My heart is yours, and it has been all this time." Leif smiled, yet the shadow behind his eyes remained, unspoken. He pressed his forehead to hers. "I will protect you," he said softly, careful to say nothing of the truth he carried, the beast he was beneath his skin, the danger that surrounded them even now. For a few precious moments, the world fell away. They walked together along the forest edge, whispering promises and sharing laughter that had been long denied. Yet even as they spoke, danger lurked nearby. Lexi crouched deeper in the underbrush, her movements fluid, precise. Her amber eyes glinted with obsession and envy. She had gathered a small assortment of deadly herbs earlier in the day, now bruising and boiling them into a tincture meant to weaken Astrid. Each step Leif took toward her, each laugh, only fueled her desire to remove the one woman who stood between her and power. Meanwhile, back at the village, tension mounted in a different way. Inga pressed herself against Erik, her hand subtly tracing his chest as she whispered of the child she would bear. "I will have your child, and you will take responsibility," she demanded, voice low but insistent. "He is mine as much as your child will be." Erik's jaw tightened, anger flashing across his features. "Do not think this changes the other matter. Astrid is to be my wife. Nothing, no child, no trickery, will change that." The argument raged, clashing like steel on stone, until the sound of footsteps interrupted them. Astrid appeared at the doorway, her cloak drawn tight, cheeks flushed from the walk. She paused at the sight of their heated expressions, but their anger only hardened her resolve. Erik's eyes followed her like a hawk spotting prey. "Fine," he said, voice low and dangerous. "The ceremony will not wait until spring. It will be tomorrow. You will marry me tomorrow, Astrid." Astrid froze, speechless. The villagers around them stirred in excitement, her parents smiling, their ambitions gleaming in their eyes. Inga's lips pressed into a thin line, fury flashing in her eyes. Even as Astrid's stomach twisted with dread, she could not shake the memory of Leif's touch, the warmth of his arms, the quiet promise of their love. And somewhere, beyond the village and the forest's edge, Lexi watched, ready to turn her plan into action, the deadly tincture clutched tightly in her hands. The threads were tightening, the stakes higher than ever. Love, jealousy, and danger intertwined, and the night ahead promised to be long, treacherous, and far from peaceful. Chapter 7: Shadows and Secrets. The village slept under a pale crescent moon, the long house dark except for the faint flicker of embers in the hearth. Outside, the snow crunched softly under Leif's boots as he approached, moving like a shadow through the trees. Every sense was alive, ears attuned to movement, nose to scents carried on the cold wind. He had waited for this moment, and now the risk was worth it. Inside the longhouse, Astrid's thoughts churned restlessly. She had tried to keep herself occupied, helping with preparations, offering advice, tending to small chores, yet her heart remained tangled with worry and longing. Every shadow, every creak of timber made her glance toward the door, half expecting Leif's tall form to emerge. He was closer than she realized. Across the snowy yard, hidden behind stacks of wood, he watched the longhouse, noting the guards, the villagers, and the light patterns. He had instructed a few of his wolves to keep silent watch from the edges, ready to warn him if danger approached. Lexi, however, was already moving through the underbrush on her own mission, eyes glinting, tincture in hand. Inside, Inga leaned against Erik, whispering assurances about her unborn child. "Once I bear him a son," she murmured, "he will have no choice but to honor me." Erik's jaw clenched. "Do not think that child will sway me from my plans. Astrid will be my wife, and there is no trickery that will change that. Tomorrow, she marries me." Inga's eyes narrowed, the fire of jealousy and determination lighting within them. Her hand tightened on Erik's arm, though he barely noticed, already focused on the impending ceremony. Astrid stepped outside, drawn by the chill air and the restless energy that had plagued her since morning. She walked past the snow-laden trees, unaware that eyes followed her from the shadows. "Leif," she whispered, startled as a familiar voice answered softly from behind a cluster of pines. "There," he said, stepping into the clearing. His arms opened, and she ran into them, the warmth of his body washing away the fear and loneliness she had carried for months. For a long moment, they simply held each other, the wind swirling snowflakes around them. Words came slowly, each one heavy with longing and relief. "I could not stay away," Leif admitted. "Not when they are forcing this marriage. You must know. I love you, Astrid. I always have." Astrid pressed her forehead to his chest. "I love you too, Leif. But, what can we do? Erik will not be denied, and my parents, they insist." His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing her skin gently. "We will find a way. But for now, we have tonight." Unseen in the shadows, Lexi crouched low, gathering poisonous herbs she had collected earlier. Her amber eyes watched the couple with a predatory gleam. The tincture she had brewed could make Astrid sick, weaken her resolve, and perhaps even prevent her from attending the ceremony tomorrow. Every small movement of Astrid's hand, every laugh, fueled Lex's obsession and desire to see herself as the one who would claim Leif's heart. Leif, lost in Astrid's gaze, remained oblivious to Lex's presence. He stroked her hair, whispered promises, and vowed silently to protect her from whatever danger lurked, though he did not yet know the full extent of Lex's scheme. Back in the village, Erik paced the longhouse, glancing toward the snowy edge of the forest with a mixture of anticipation and impatience. Tomorrow's ceremony would be swift, decisive, and final. Astrid would be his, no matter her heart's desire. Inga watched from nearby, a satisfied smirk tugging at her lips. Her hand rested possessively against her belly. "Soon," she whispered. "Soon, he will have no choice." But as the night stretched on, the threads of fate twisted and tightened. Love, jealousy, and danger converged under the pale moonlight. One wrong move, one glance in the wrong direction, and everything could shatter. Astrid's heart, Leif's plans, and the fragile balance between the village and the wolves beyond the trees. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Tomorrow would come fast, bringing with it the clash of loyalty, love, and ambition, and no one would emerge unscathed. Chapter 8. The Edge of Betrayal. The dawn was brittle and cold, the sky streaked with pale rose and grey. In the village, the longhouse hummed with frantic preparations. The wedding was set for mid-morning. Erik's pride and impatience had shortened the timeline, leaving villagers scrambling to arrange the hall, the ceremonial altar, and the tables for the feast. Astrid moved among them, her hands busy with small tasks, her heart beating a frantic rhythm that had nothing to do with the cold. Every glance toward the door, every shadow beyond the windows, reminded her of Leif and of the dangerous knowledge that someone was already plotting against her. Lexi crept silently through the underbrush at the forest's edge, clutching the tincture she had crafted. Every step brought her closer to her target, Astrid. The wolf within her coiled with anticipation. This would be the moment she could remove the one who had captured Leif's heart and claim him for herself. Leif, aware of the heightened danger but careful not to alarm Astrid, moved like a shadow between trees and rooftops. He had stationed a few of his loyal wolves in hidden positions around the village, ready to warn him if Lexi made a move too early. His heart pounded, not from exertion, but from fear for Astrid, for the delicate thread of time that separated safety from disaster. Inside the longhouse, Erik busied himself with ceremonial preparations, glancing toward Astrid with possessive satisfaction. Inga, flaunting her pregnancy, followed him with every subtle glance and touch, hoping to provoke jealousy or distraction. The moment arrived. Lexi, unseen, slipped close to the edge of the longhouse, the tincture in her palm. She moved with the silence of a predator, eyes locked on Astrid as she reached for the door. Leif's sharp ears caught the faintest scrape of her boots on the frost-hardened ground. A growl, low and warning, escaped his throat, unheard by the humans but enough to alert the other wolves. Lexi froze for a heartbeat, sensing the invisible eyes that tracked her every move. Astrid, oblivious to the danger outside, stepped into the courtyard to admire the preparations, her hands brushing the snow-tipped branches. Her breath fogged in the cold air. And then, motion at the edge of her vision. Leif surged forward, a shadow among shadows, placing himself between Astrid and Lexi in a fluid, predatory movement. "Stay back," he warned, his voice low but commanding. Lexi hissed, a blend of fury and frustration, realizing her advantage had vanished. She retreated, but not before her eyes locked on Astrid with lethal promise. Inside, Erik sensed the sudden tension but could not see the forest beyond the windows. He turned to find Inga smirking smugly, unaware that the real threat was already outside, invisible and waiting. Astrid's pulse raced as Leif's hand held hers tightly. "You are safe, for now," he whispered. "But they will not stop. They will not give up until they have what they want." Her mind swirled with fear and desire, love and frustration. She wanted to throw herself into his arms, to run with him to the safety of the forest. But the village, her family, the expectations of duty held her back. Leif's eyes swept the tree line, calculating, preparing. "I will not let them take you," he said again, teeth gritted, jaw tense. "No matter what the cost." The morning sun broke over the horizon, illuminating the village in a cold, harsh light. Shadows still lingered in the corners of the courtyard and at the edge of the forest. Every heart in the village was about to be tested. And above it all, Lexi retreated, plotting anew, vowing that her next move would succeed. Inga, meanwhile, worked to tighten her hold on Erik, unaware of the more immediate threat creeping closer with silent, unstoppable claws. The day of the wedding had begun, and the storm of love, jealousy, and danger had only just begun to descend. Chapter 9. Chaos at the Altar. The village square was alive with chatter and nervous energy. Tables were laid with carved bowls and freshly baked bread, banners fluttered from the eaves, and a bitter wind tugged at the furs of villagers gathered to witness the long-anticipated wedding. Astrid stood at the center, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the fur cloak around her shoulders. Erik appeared beside her, a mask of smug triumph. "Today," he declared loudly, "Astrid becomes my wife. And no one, no wolf, no rival, no treacherous heart, shall stop this union." Astrid's stomach twisted. She could hear the faint rustle of movement at the tree line, and her heart leapt. Somewhere in the forest, Leif watched, every nerve coiled like a spring. He had promised her safety, and now he waited for the perfect moment to intervene. Inside the longhouse, Inga smiled faintly, rubbing her belly as she imagined how soon her child would secure her place as Erik's true partner. She had played her game meticulously, but she did not see the larger storm approaching, the shadow of the wolf and the cunning of Lexi moving unseen. As the ceremony began, Lexi slipped silently through the outskirts of the crowd, the tincture in hand. Her amber eyes gleamed with obsession. One wrong move, and Astrid would be incapacitated, her heart and future dangling in Lexi's claws. Leif's growl, low and menacing, vibrated through the edge of the forest. The wolves he had stationed were tense, ears pricked, ready to leap. He could sense Lexi's presence, the threat immediate. With a surge, he bounded forward, moving faster than the eye could follow. "Stay behind me!" Leif shouted to Astrid, appearing at her side just as Lexi lunged. Chaos erupted. Villagers screamed and scattered as the she-wolf's fury clashed with Leif's controlled strength. Lexi hissed, her claws flashing, but Leif's agility and skill kept her at bay. The square became a blur of shouting, running feet, and the feral growls of a wolf pack now fully revealed to the astonished humans. Astrid's heart pounded. She wanted to scream at Leif, to demand answers, to demand the truth he had kept hidden. But there was no time. With a swift movement, he blocked a strike from Lexi, knocking her back into the snow. Erik, frozen at the edge of the chaos, tried to rally his men, but fear had taken hold. They had never seen the like of this. Men and wolves, strength and ferocity beyond mortal reckoning. Inga's triumphant smirk faltered as she realized her scheming had become meaningless in the face of raw power. Her hands gripped Erik's arm, eyes wide with panic as she watched Leif protect Astrid, moving with unnatural speed and precision. The fight reached its apex as Lexi, snarling and furious, circled Leif, attempting a strike from behind. But he anticipated her movement, his senses sharper than any human's. In one fluid motion, he subdued her, keeping her alive but neutralized, and turned to Astrid. He knelt before her, voice low, urgent. "Astrid, I have kept this secret, but you must know. I am not entirely as men are. I am a werewolf. I have loved you from afar, protected you in every shadow. Will you trust me?" For a heartbeat, the world froze. Astrid's mind spun with fear, disbelief, and longing. Her eyes searched his, the man she loved and the creature she could never have imagined, and in that instant, she understood the truth of his devotion. Her lips parted. "Leif, I..." But before she could answer, the snow-shrouded tree line shivered, and another shadow moved among the pack, hinting at danger yet to come. The wedding square had become a battlefield, and the storm was far from over. Chapter 10. Shadows over the village. The snow was crusted and slippery underfoot, the morning sun casting pale light over the village now littered with scattered chairs, overturned tables, and the remnants of Lexi's failed ambush. Villagers peered cautiously from behind buildings, whispers of fear and/or running through the crowd. No one dared approach the forest edge where the wolf pack now lingered, their eyes glowing with intelligence and warning. Astrid clutched Leif's arm, her pulse still racing from the revelation of his true nature. Her mind was a storm of emotions: fear, wonder, love, and the dawning realization that her life would never be ordinary again. Leif kept his senses sharp, ears twitching at every sound, alert for Lexi or any other threat. The pack had remained at the perimeter, loyal and disciplined, their presence a silent guarantee of Astrid's safety, for now. Inside the longhouse, Erik's pride had crumbled into barely contained fury. His men whispered among themselves, unsure how to confront a being they had only believed to exist in legend. Inga, still clinging to her claim as Erik's future mate and mother of his child, had gone pale. Her schemes had been rendered meaningless by forces she could not comprehend. Erik's jaw tightened. "This is not over," he hissed. "No creature, no matter how unnatural, will take what is mine." Astrid looked at him, her voice steady but cold. "You mean to take my life as you would your possession? I will never be yours, Erik. Not now, not ever." Leif's hand tightened around hers, a comforting anchor. "She speaks the truth," he said, his voice low and unwavering. "Your threats mean nothing here." Lexi, though subdued, had not disappeared. She slinked through the shadows, nursing humiliation and rage, her eyes fixed on Astrid. She would wait. She would plot. She would strike when the pack's attention was elsewhere. The villagers began to stir, murmuring to one another. Some bowed respectfully to Leif, sensing the extraordinary power he wielded, while others glanced at Astrid with a mixture of awe and apprehension. She realized then that her return to the village had changed everything, not just for herself, but for everyone who lived here. As the sun climbed higher, Leif lowered his gaze to Astrid. "We must leave soon," he said gently. "It is not safe here. Lexi will not give up, and Erik's obsession will only grow stronger. I can take you to the pack, to safety, but the choice is yours." Astrid's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of the decision. She thought of her parents, of the clan she had longed to return to, of the life she might have had, and then she thought of Leif, of his devotion, of the wild freedom that pulsed in his every move. Her lips parted. I need to think," she whispered. "I cannot leave, not yet. But I cannot stay here either." Leif nodded, understanding the conflict that roiled within her. "We will wait," he said softly. "But the danger grows by the hour. You must be ready." Above them, the forest rustled. A shadow moved in the distance, neither entirely wolf nor entirely man. Lex's eyes gleamed with a malicious promise, and Leif's instinct screamed that the storm was far from over. As Astrid and Leif stood together, the villagers looking on, and the wolves lingering like ghosts at the forest's edge, a single thought crystallized in her mind. Love, duty, and survival would collide, and no one could predict the outcome. The winter sun rose fully, illuminating the village and the forest beyond, but the shadows remained. And in those shadows, the next battle was already taking shape. Chapter 11: Flight and Fire. The moon rose pale and cold over the village, its light glinting off the snow-covered roofs. Astrid stood beside Leif at the forest edge, her fingers entwined with his. The village behind them was quiet, deceptively so, but she could feel the lingering unease of the villagers and the restless energy of the wolf pack surrounding them. Leif's gaze swept over the village, sharp and alert. "We cannot stay another night. Lexi is still loose, and Erik's obsession grows by the hour. If we wait, we risk more than just our freedom." Astrid nodded, swallowing her fear. "Then we leave now. I trust you, Leif. I always have." The forest swallowed them as they moved, silent as shadows, the wolves flanking them on either side. Every snap of a twig made Astrid's heart jump, but Leif's steady presence calmed her, anchoring her fear with his strength. Suddenly, a rustle ahead signaled danger. Lexi stepped out from behind a cluster of pines, her amber eyes burning with rage. "You think you can escape me?" she hissed. Her form shifted, fur bristling, teeth flashing as she lunged toward Astrid. Leaf reacted instantly, moving between Astrid and Lexi. The clash was brutal, Lexi snapping and clawing while Leaf dodged with preternatural speed. Astrid watched, breathless, as Leaf subdued Lexi again, though this time he did not fully restrain her. He left her writhing, a warning and a promise that the fight was far from over. "Go!" Leaf commanded. "We must reach the ridge before dawn." They ran through the forest, snow crunching beneath their boots, wolves keeping pace. Astrid clung to Leaf, the adrenaline mixing with a thrill she had never known. Each step carried them further from the village, further from Erik's reach, yet closer to unknown dangers in the wild. Back in the village, Erik realized the pair had vanished. His fury was immediate, a red haze clouding his vision. "Gather the men," he bellowed. "They will not escape me. I swear it on Odin himself." Inga, pale and anxious, clutched her belly. "Erik, perhaps we should wait. If Lexi is involved, she will only make things worse." Erik's eyes flared. "I will have Astrid, no matter the cost." Far above, the first light of dawn touched the treetops. Leaf and Astrid reached the high ridge overlooking the valley, the wind whipping at their faces. For a moment, they paused, chest heaving, hearts pounding, not just from the exertion, but from the undeniable connection that had grown between them. Leaf's hand lifted to Astrid's cheek. "I will protect you," he vowed, his voice low and steady. "From Lexi, from Erik, from anyone who would try to harm you. But you must be ready. Once we cross into the mountains beyond the ridge, there is no turning back." Astrid met his gaze, fierce and unwavering. "I am ready, Leaf. I choose you." The wolf pack howled in unison, a sound that carried across the valley, both warning and declaration. Lexi's furious howl answered from the shadows behind them, and Leaf stiffened, sensing the threat still lurking, but not yet able to reach them. As they prepared to descend into the wild, the wind carried another sound, a distant horn from the village, signaling that Erik had already mobilized. The chase had begun. And somewhere in the forest, Lexi's eyes gleamed with murderous intent, her claws ready to strike, her mind scheming. The battle for Astrid's heart, and her very life, was far from over. Chapter 12: The Clash at Frost Hollow. The valley below was bathed in dawn's cold light as Leaf led Astrid down the ridge. Snow crunched beneath their boots, each step echoing through the empty trees. Around them, the wolf pack moved like a shadowy guard, eyes glowing, ears pricked. Lexi lingered just beyond sight, her snarls carried on the wind, a promise of violence yet to come. Leaf stopped suddenly, his senses screaming. "They're here," he whispered, voice tense. From the village edge, smoke rose, and the horn sounded again. Erik had not wasted a moment. Soldiers, armed and determined, pushed through the snow, their numbers greater than Leaf had anticipated. Astrid gripped his arm, fear and determination warring in her chest. "What do we do?" Leaf's jaw tightened. "We fight, but wisely. The valley's narrow here. We can make a stand." The wolves spread out, forming a living barrier around them. Lexi watched from the tree line, her eyes calculating, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Astrid saw her, a flash of recognition, and shivered. Erik's voice boomed across the snow, carried by both anger and authority. "Astrid, step forward. You belong to me." Astrid's heart pounded, but she did not flinch. She looked at Leaf, who nodded once, firm and steady. Then he let out a guttural roar, a warning that echoed off the frost-laden cliffs. The wolves responded with howls, a chorus of strength and defiance. The first clash was brutal. Soldiers advanced, but the wolves were faster, stronger, coordinated in a way that left the humans staggering. Snow flew as claws met shields, teeth snapped at boots, and the scent of iron and fur filled the valley. Leif moved like a storm among them, fangs bared, strength amplified by his wolf form's latent power. Astrid stayed close, throwing stones and tripping attackers when she could, her heart racing with both fear and exhilaration. She was no longer just the girl from the village. She was a force beside Leif, bound by love and courage. Lexi, enraged by the chaos, finally leapt into the fray. Her claws raked across one of the pack, forcing Leif to intervene. Their fight was feral and precise, each movement a deadly dance. But Leif held back just enough to avoid killing her, his mind only on protecting Astrid. Erik, seeing his forces falter, charged forward himself, sword raised. He collided with Leif, human strength against wolf-enhanced speed. Sparks flew from steel meeting fangs, and snow sprayed in all directions. Astrid watched, frozen, her stomach twisting as she realized the danger Leif faced. Then, just as the fight reached a peak, a howl split the air, a call from deeper in the mountains. More of Leif's pack surged forward, tipping the balance. The soldiers faltered, Erik's fury mounting, but he could not control the tide of the wolves now swarming the valley. Astrid, standing on a rock, shouted above the din, "Leif! Together!" He nodded, eyes locking on hers for a brief, potent second. Then they moved as one, human and wolf, love and fury intertwined. The clash continued, snow turning to mud and ice, but a new order had been established. The pack's power was undeniable, and the humans realized, fearfully, that the balance had shifted. But in the shadows, Lexi plotted still. Her teeth bared, eyes glowing with hatred, she waited for a moment of weakness, knowing it would come. And Erik, chest heaving, realized that this battle had not ended, it had only begun. Chapter 13, The Choice. The valley trembled under the chaos of battle. Wolves and soldiers collided in a storm of fur, steel, and snow, each strike echoing through the frosted cliffs. Leif moved like a tempest, a force of nature, while Astrid darted among the trees, guiding wolves and helping the wounded where she could. But as the day wore on, she could see the toll the fight had taken. Injured men and animals lay in the snow, some struggling to rise, others silent. Smoke curled from small fires set by errant torches, and the wails of the fallen carried through the frozen air. Her heart ached at the sight. Innocent lives caught in a war that had started long before she and Leif had crossed paths. As night approached, Leif called the retreat. The pack and the soldiers alike withdrew to regroup, the valley temporarily silent but still scorched with the remnants of the day's fury. Astrid sank to her knees in the snow, hands trembling, tears freezing on her cheeks. Leif knelt beside her, brushing snow from her hair. "Astrid, we can continue. We can finish this tomorrow." She shook her head, voice shaking but resolute. "No, Leif. I cannot. I cannot carry on with this fight. I cannot live knowing that lives were lost because of me. Because of us." Her chest heaved. "I must return to Erik. I will become his wife. No matter the cost, but I have one request." Leif's brow furrowed, uncertainty shadowing his features. "Anything," he whispered, his voice low, tense. She reached for him, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "One last time. I want you to be with me, fully, as we are now. I want to feel you, to remember, before I leave." The cold night wrapped around them as they leaned into each other. Their passion began slowly, almost tender, with whispered confessions and shared warmth, but it gradually intensified. Each touch, each kiss, carried the weight of everything they could not say aloud: love, desperation, longing. They moved together under the pale moonlight, their bodies melding in a fierce, quiet intimacy that burned against the cold night. Eventually, exhausted, they fell asleep in each other's arms, wrapped in heat and solace amidst the frozen forest. Astrid dreamed briefly of the life she wished they could have had, a life uninterrupted by war, by duty, by deceit. When dawn broke, Astrid stirred and froze. The wolf pack was gone. Leif's absence struck her like a cold wave, her chest tightening with sudden emptiness. He had vanished without a word, leaving only the lingering warmth of the night, and the knowledge that she had no choice but to return. With heavy steps and a heart both full and breaking, Astrid made her way back to the village. The sun rose over the snowy roofs as she approached, her mind steeled, her decision made. There was no more hesitation. She entered the hall where Erik waited, his eyes lighting up with triumph. The ceremony was swift. Astrid's parents beamed, oblivious to the turmoil in their daughter's heart. Inga sat quietly, seething, the knowledge of her own schemes delayed but not deterred. Astrid exchanged vows with Erik, her words steady, her mind haunted by the memory of Leif's arms around her, the warmth of his presence, and the love she could never openly claim. As the sun set on that first day of her new life, Astrid could only hope, fiercely, desperately, that one day, somehow, Leif would return, and the story that had begun on a snowy ridge would not end here.